Hey, we are live. Good morning. Happy Thursday from beautiful Plymouth. We're going to talk about Vivek in a second. We're going to talk about presidential debates, copycat lawsuits, dumb YouTubers, Tracy Casper speaks from NAR, and a good story. We have a good story coming out of Vermont about a real estate agent who did the right thing, and we'll probably talk a little bit about mortgage rates in today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. Last night at the presidential debate, and I don't want to get into this a big deal, and this is not an endorsement of any particular candidate, but I want to just demonstrate that this happened at the presidential debate last night, and this shows that housing is starting to pop as a poll concern, a concern amongst so many people across the country that it's now kind of bleeding into the presidential debate, which again talks about how advantageous it is to beat up on real estate agents right now, which is part of what's driving what's going on, aside from the fact that NAR is also guilty of what they did. But with affordability being so difficult right now, because of what the Fed has done, coming out and saying we're going to crack down on real estate commissions could be a very popular angle for politicians to take across the political spectrum. So last night at the presidential debate, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running as a Republican candidate, brought up the affordable housing issue. And this is only an 11-second clip. Let's listen to what he said.
Increase the supply of housing. People don't talk about this one in the Republican Party. The land use restrictions are constricting the supply of housing. That's making housing more expensive for ordinary Americans across this country.
All right, so he's talking about land use or zoning. You might have remembered that Neel Kashkari, I was very critical of Neel Kashkari from the Fed the other day, saying that was the number one factor. In fact, he said it was the factor, the only factor for affordability, as if the Fed had nothing to do with it. The object lesson here is that housing is moving up the radar in terms of an important political issue across the country. If you know anything about politics, Vivek didn't mention this just kind of as a lark. He mentioned it because it's showing up in the polling. That's an important contextual thing to understand as we talk about the copycat lawsuits that are coming and started to come starting as soon as yesterday. So we're not going to get into details in this particular lawsuit, but it's from buyers. And it's like a resurrection of a prior lawsuit. And basically, the buyers are suing. Let me get this straight. Sorry about that. The buyers are suing. This should be better. Yeah, that's much better. Mother of all commission lawsuits filed in Illinois by buyers. This is going to be called Batten 2 is the nickname. And it's seeking a class action status against Compass, EXP, World Holdings, Redfin, Weichert, United Real Estate, Howard Hanna, Douglas Elliman. Is that how you say that? I have no idea how to say that. And it's in a massive amount of states, from Arizona all the way to here to Massachusetts. We won't even count all the states. And it goes back until 1996. So the lawsuit that was filed last week, which is called Gibson, that was filed almost immediately after the verdict, that has an estimated, once you triple it, damages of $600 billion. Apparently, this Batten 2 case far exceeds that. You thought $600 billion was the largest it could be. Apparently not. Apparently, it could be as much as or much more than that. And when you stop and think about this, these are kind of like national cases that can be copycatted, but there's a great opportunity, or from a lawyer perspective, if you want to make money doing class action lawsuits. Still haven't cashed my $3 check for my victory in my class action lawsuit that I didn't even know about it until they sent me the check. But if you want to file class action lawsuits, not only are there national opportunities to do that if you're a lawyer, but there's probably also regional opportunities to do that if you're a lawyer. In other words, there are plenty of players out there successful real estate agencies that have assets way beyond the assets that I have as my tiny little agency, but successful agencies out there that are not national names, but regional names. I'm going to bring up one here that kind of makes sense. And this is not to deride this agency in any way. And I'm not saying that they've done anything wrong in any way, shape, or form. And anytime that I've ever dealt with them, it's always been super professional. But they are a regional powerhouse. And, you know, from a lawyer point of view, not that I'm a lawyer, as you know, but from a lawyer point of view, I look at a company like this and I say, I could see them. You know, and it's William Revis. You probably, no matter where you live in the country, there's probably other regional players that are not national names, but they're really big in your region. Bill Revis started this in 1974. God bless him. Good for him. I think he's got his sons working for him now or something like that. And it's a major, respectable business. They're in insurance. They're in Florida. They're huge in the Northeast. They could be part of like a tertiary lawsuit or secondary of a copycat situation. Here in Massachusetts, I'll think of another name just so I'm not focusing just on Revis, but Jack Conway is huge in southeastern Massachusetts. Mr. Conway himself has passed away about a decade ago. God rest his soul, but I think his daughter runs the company. They're a huge real estate name here in Massachusetts. You could see like a lawyer, you could see that. You see what I'm saying? You could see like, you know what? A bunch of these big lawyers sued EXP and Warren Buffett, and they sued Century 21. But look at, there's some ripe locals that we could sue. We could still make some money out of doing that. Remember, some of these lawyers are not interested in the policy change. They're interested in the money, right? Yeah, right. Of course they are. So I think reflecting upon that, there's a number of YouTubers out there that are not helping themselves. They're basically creating new videos that could be used against them. So you remember in the Sitzer case that they played this video. This was the ambush video from the Tom Ferry podcast experience. Let's hit play now. You remember this one?
You might want to write this down if you have your iPhone. Here's a technique. There's no bleeping way I'm going to cut my bleeping commission. What do you think?
All right, you get the idea. You remember that video. And I think there are plenty of people out there actually creating new versions of that video that could be played in subsequent copycat lawsuits. And yeah, I'm reluctant to pick on anybody, but the first person I'm going to pick on is like this. He has a big YouTube channel, so I'm not picking on somebody that's a tiny little channel, even smaller than mine. But let's pick on Ricky Carruth for a second, right? Just the utter disdain that Ricky Carruth has for this decision, not looking good.
You know what? I'm going to sue everybody because I didn't get to pay my commission.
All right. So you get he's basically creating new content that could be used against him and or other real estate agents in another lawsuit. I would say that another person that would fall into that same category.
Negotiate. Realtors are charging too much. Realtors are charging
locally here in Massachusetts. Anthony Labacchia. So he runs a very successful real estate business, I think, out of Waltham. And he's been railing against this decision. And I could totally see if I was his attorney, which I'm not, because I'm not an attorney at all. But if I was Anthony's attorney, I'd be like pulling him aside and I say, dude, you might want to dial this down a little bit. Because literally, I could definitely see some local attorneys filing a class action case in Massachusetts, which actually also makes a lot more sense if you're trying to get out from under this. Like, how it kind of spurs the question, how does the industry get out from under this? And how do we get a universal settlement that settles everything? How do we get a universal settlement that settles everything? And I think that's where we have to kind of look for in the future. But as we look for that, we did not see a lot of hope from that when we heard from Tracy Casper, who's the new president of NAR. She released a video, her first basically public statement since the settlement. And it's a 5-minute video. We are not going to cover the whole 5 minutes because the second half of it is really not that super substantive. But I want to dive in to the first half of it. Let's bring it up on the screen. Thank you so much for your comments, by the way. Sharon said, "Who could forget that video?" Sharon said, "Yeah, laugh out loud." And let's see, we have Mike with a comment here. Broker owners should be asking themselves, how much of the commissions do I need to keep to offset the risk moving forward? Very interesting question, Mike. Unintended consequence, end of 100% commission brokerages. I'm not, I'd like some more detail on that comment, exactly what you mean by that. But yeah, that's an interesting comment. I'd love some more detail on that, exactly what you mean. Type in some more detail. We'll bring it back up later in the show. Let's take a look at what Tracy Casper, president of NAR, said. Here we go, Tracy.
It's been a really busy week here at NAR. So first, we are so glad to welcome Nakia to NAR and to congratulate Bob Goldberg on his retirement. And I have heard from so many of you, so many warm wishes for both of them and optimism.
Congratulate Bob Goldberg. He just drove our organization into an iceberg. But yeah, good for him.
For our future. So thank you for that outreach. And I just wanted you to know I share your optimism.
Based on what? Optimism?
At the same time, I know that there are questions about last week's verdict.
You
so
think?
I wanted to reach out directly. As a fellow realtor, I get it. I'm a broker owner. I list and sell properties just like you do every single day.
Now, I just want to interrupt really quickly and say that the tone and the tenor, the delivery of this presentation far surpasses that of what we would see with like Ricky Carruth or Anthony Lamacchia. She comes off as likable, as trustworthy. I know she's reading a script. I get that, but her delivery, the cosmetics of the entire situation, her friendliness, she's a fairly good spokesperson from like those superficial things. You might think they're superficial. They matter. And I'm going to give her really good grades for all of those things.
And I too have employees, and I'm getting those questions myself. I was incredibly disappointed by the verdict. The jury reached an outcome that was neither supported by the law nor the facts that were presented in this case. I've heard questions about whether our team put on witnesses to help us to tell our story.
Yeah, because you lost. Like you got dunked upon, like Daryl Dawkins.
And I want you to know we did. For example, our legal counsel put on an independent realtor and passed.
All right, by the way, I don't know why the chief legal counsel, I think her name is Katie Johnson. There was some rumor on Twitter that she may get fired. Then there was the denial but if I'm the new CEO, the first thing I'm doing is firing the chief lawyer if for any other reason to show that I am the CEO. Because if you can't fire anybody when you take over an organization in trouble, then everyone soon finds out that you work for them instead of the other way around. You almost have to fire somebody when you come on board as the new CEO to show who's boss. And so who else to fire would be the chief legal counsel who just lost $5.3 billion. So there is some rumor that she's on her way out. She probably should be.
President Sharon Millett, who shared her personal story about how NAR rules serve the best interests of our consumers, support market-driven pricing, and advance business competition. We also put on expert witnesses, including an economist who explained why our practices actually benefit sellers and buyers and promote competition.
None of which the jury believed, but you know.
Unfortunately, as you all know, the jury did not rule in our favor. The plaintiffs try to portray this outcome as a win for consumers, but those of us in the industry know that the opposite is true. The verdict runs contrary to what we all know about the value we bring, not only to our clients, but to the functioning of a buyer-seller real estate market more generally. As we have said previously, this is one chapter in a very long legal process. We plan to appeal the verdict. In the meantime, as that process proceeds, you should be aware that there could be other legal developments. For example, the plaintiffs in Missouri may ask the court to issue an order that changes the rules about cooperative compensation.
And that's what we're waiting for next, right? The injunction, basically, there's the monetary damage and then there's the injunction. And we're also waiting for the DOJ to intervene. And what we learned the other day is that the DOJ and the plaintiffs are coordinating their response.
There are other legal actions pending, and we may see additional plaintiffs come forward to make similar allegations in new cases.
All right, so she didn't use the phrase copycat lawsuits, but that's what she's saying. That's exactly what she's saying. So let's see. We have a number of comments here. By the way, Bill Bedingfield from New Hampshire said the other day that he was thinking that Amazon might be a player in real estate, but then he said at some point, Amazon will be too big and then they'll have to chop it up into little pieces so the lawyers come back and make more money. The lawyers sue so Amazon can take over, and then when Amazon takes over, they sue again. So it's like a lawyer cycle. That was a very good, insightful opportunity. You can see another comment here from Bill. This is a good opportunity for a CMA software company like RPR to go mainstream as a tool for buyers. That's it. That is very interesting, Bill, because a lot of buyers, sadly, ask themselves, okay, how much should we bid, rather than asking themselves, how much is the actual property worth? And a lot of buyers, especially now, they bid, how do I want to say this? What the lender will allow them to bid. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. You could... David, you can almost smell the smoke as it burns behind her. Well, I thought she did a good job in her presentation. Much more likable, much more professional than the tremendously defensive positions that you see all over the internet, of which Ricky Caruth, for instance, is just one representation of. You can see them in Facebook comments everywhere. Let's go to Mike Weathers. Agents aren't going to be sued. No, I don't think agents, and there's just no money in suing individual agents, or be responsible for the judgment. Brokers are. I actually would disagree. I think brokerages are, not the individuals. In addition to copycat lawsuits, the door is open for dual agency lawsuits. Well, dual agency is legal in many, many states, including here in Massachusetts. But, we might look at a situation where dual agency is no longer allowed. And I think it's disallowed, if that's the way I want to say it, in 9 states, if my recollection is. Fraud, fair housing, etc., with no buyer agents. I love that question, Mike. And I think it's come back to what I've said before. There is no perfect outcome, I don't think. And there could be the law of unintended consequences where, as Bess Friedman said, and many people have said before, that we might actually be this kind of like a Back to the Future situation where there might be less buyer representation, which gets back to Bill Bedingfield's bigger point where that'll just feed a cycle of more lawsuits, right? Because buyers won't be represented. That we could definitely be going in that type of direction. Let me just throw out a business model. However, let me suggest to you this business model. Because buyers can now find the house on their own, right? Buyers can find their house on their own. But let's just say buyers want to be protected with a representative that want to work directly for them. But they don't need an agent to go show them houses. They'll just go to the open house. What if there was a platform that you could get buyer representation, but it was basically completely different? Now, the buyer agent never left the office. The buyer agent supported them virtually and worked for a lot less, maybe like a flat fee, X amount of dollars. That would be a lot less. And therefore, that buyer agent that buyer agent might be able to close 20 deals in a month at a much smaller number, but they never have to leave their desk. They literally could work from home. I know that's kind of sounds upon this guy, but you got to start to think creatively about the different type of business opportunities that might be available in what could be a fairly relatively near future, let's see. I think we're caught up to comments, and I'm loving your comments today. Thank you so much. So I want to talk about this agent out of Vermont, who did the right thing. Let's talk about some positive news here. This is a great story out of Vermont, and it's an object lesson for all of us, especially, I just mentioned the concept of working virtually. This is a really good lesson to learn about working virtually and knowing your customer, right? Knowing your customer. So let's bring up this story from Vermont, ABC 10, your local news leader in Vermont.
Trusted her instincts.
News 10 ABC's Tamara Starr has more on how a scammer tried to sell property that did not even belong to them.
The Vermont District Attorney's Office says identity theft is one of the top 10 scams in the state. But one real estate agent had no idea that a potential client looking to sell land was a possible scammer who had stolen someone's identity.
When I ultimately sent them all of the marketing information.
And let's just pause right here and give Jennifer Hoffman, owner of Hoffman Real Estate, kudos. Good for you, Jennifer, for doing the right thing here.
And we went back and forth talking about the pricing strategy. He said that they agreed with everything I was proposing and they were ready to proceed.
Even though none of the meetings were in person.
That was the key point. None of the meetings were in person. So she really didn't know who she was dealing with.
She couldn't help but feel that the deal was running a little too smoothly, especially when she asked for ID and then received passport photos. Hoffman looked deeper and found out that the real owners had moved out of the area 30 years ago, and while they still owned the land, they had not contacted her to sell it for them. The town was able to give Hoffman the real owner's contact information.
So I picked up the phone and I called the wife and I introduced myself and I said, "Do you know who I am?" And I gave her my first name and my company name. And she said, "No, should I?" And I said, "Well, I've been emailing with your husband for a week and he happened to be in the car." So she said, "Jose, do you know who this person is?" He said, "No idea."
News 10 tried to contact the couple, but they felt too uncomfortable to do an interview out of fear of being involved in another
anyway,
scam.
she canceled the contract because what was happening, and you would hope that further down the process that would have been discovered by the title company and or the attorneys. But this woman here, Jennifer Hoffman, Hoffman Real Estate in Vermont, good for you, Jennifer. She smelt out the scam beforehand. Now, this whole trend of not knowing your clients, not seeing them in person is a big deal. I have had clients that, especially landlord clients that I'm renting out properties for, I have had clients that I have never met in person. I had one guy here in Plymouth. I knew his family, so I knew he was legit. Plus, I could look it up on the town record. But I rented that. It was a single family home. I had a business relationship with this guy for like 5 years. He was really smart client. He lived somewhere else, New York or something. I can't remember. I never met the guy I never met him ever. And I rented out that house maybe like 3 times and ended up selling it for him. Remember, rentals usually lead to bigger things. I'm a big fan of having rentals as part of your business portfolio. And I never met the guy. And I've had other clients like that where it was like a second degree of separation. Never met the guy. I had one guy, commercial real estate guy, who I was doing a deal with. It. He's a Dunkin' Donuts franchisor, and he runs the Dunkin' Donuts. He like 50 Dunkin' Donuts. And I finally went to a meeting with him, and I didn't know who he was. But I figured it out in the parking lot because he showed up in the fanciest car. So I'm thinking the guy that runs 50 Dunkin' Donuts, I'm pretty sure that's him in the Maserati. And it was, right? That wasn't that hard to figure out. But it was a little disconcerting because I had never seen him before. And so I was like, who is this guy going into the meeting? So you really want to be super careful about who you're dealing with when you don't see people. And I think that is a more and more common thing as we have coming out. It was a trend before the whole virus thing took off. And now it's even more so. And certainly I see that all the way through the process, beginning to end. Especially, I don't know about how closings used to go in your state, but there was a time here in Massachusetts where everyone would show up at the same conference room. The other agent, you, the other agent, the mortgage person, the buyers and sellers, the lawyer for it's like there was like 9 or 10 people at a closing. That doesn't happen at all ever. So, keep that in mind from a point of view. If you think something's amiss with your deal, you're probably right. And it's worth investigating to find out, you don't want to, because you don't want to hear this bad news because it might affect your commission, but it's not worth risking your license or getting into some giant lawsuit thing. It's much better to check. So good for you, this agent out in Vermont. Mortgage rates have dipped below and have stayed below 7.5% for the last couple of days. And I think we're right now at like 7.41. This is good news. I was wrong for now. I do think that eventually they're going to go up. Let's take a look at the 10-year. The 10-year seems to be stuck in a trading band at about 4.5 and 6, maybe 4.5, 4.6. I think eventually, sadly, I do think this number is going to go higher. The spread has shrunk. We were at a spread between almost about 310 basis points. Now we're down to about 290. Then what that spread is, the spread is the difference between this number that you see on the page here and the 30-year fixed rate. And that took about a 20-point hit. And there's probably more space for that to decline. But overall, continue to be fairly negative about where interest rates are going to go, because as you heard me say before, what would it cost to stabilize the national debt, which is soaring? This story from Axios, U.S. public debt as a share of GDP. Oh my God, look at that chart. 180% is projected in 2050. And just look at that trend line. Oh, that is not a good trend line going forward. We're above 100% right now. And that is the trend line. I've been telling you about this. This is not good. According to this study by Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner, neither of them, I'm not a fan of either of them, which makes me actually respect the report even more. It would take spending cuts or tax increases equivalent to $2,400 per American, not per taxpayer, per American, to stabilize the national debt, according to a new book by Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner. And again, I'm not a big fan of either of them, but that is huge. By the way, I also don't believe that raising taxes generates more revenue. They're Keynesians. They believe that. It's not true. Raising taxes generates less revenue. Repeat after me. Raising tax rates generates less revenue. And counterintuitively, lowering tax revenue actually generates more revenue. I know it doesn't sound like it, but it's absolutely true. It's the Laffer curve. It's undeniable. It's true. Lower rates generate economic activity and generate more revenue. It's just plain old true. All right. So any other quotes? Let's see. We have Sharon here. I've had that happen with the rental. Drove to the house and the owner had no idea was it listed. That's a really good point, Sharon. And rentals, of course, are rife with all sorts of ethical and legal issues. It's probably the number one field in the business that has the highest risk. If you're a rental agency in Boston and like 90% of your business is doing rentals, wow, it could be really problematic from a legal point of view. You got to really be super, super careful to make sure that you don't get sued, especially in the rental business. Excellent point. Lastly, we'll leave with this. 20% of U.S. offices are vacant. WeWork's bankruptcy will make the problem worse. I'm happy to say that the WeWork that I work out of Boston is still open. I don't know how long that's going to be for, but they're still open. The bankruptcy could have a ripple effect, however, on small and mid-sized bank holding landlord debt. So where WeWork has leases, those leases are in buildings and the landlords have mortgages on those. Those are held by small and mid-sized banks, causing banks to tighten loans on home. And you see, it's a ripple effect. It's a multiplier effect. Just like the collapse of Silicon Valley and Signature Bank earlier this year. It could also hit municipal governments because of less tax revenue. But of course, the story is all about me. My WeWork at 711 Atlantic is still in business for now. So I hopefully still say, as you know, I've been a big WeWork fan since they came to Boston. I joined in 2014, which was their first year. And I hope they stay in business. Hey, listen, I had a great time today on the show. And I'll be back here tomorrow at 8:30. Thank you so much for your comments. Over the Christmas break, I'm going to do a 3-part series about how much money I made on this show in the first 30 days, the process, how I developed the show, and from a content point of view. And then I'm going to do a 3rd part, which is the technical point of view, which didn't go as smoothly today as I had hoped, but it worked okay. So that will be a series that will drop sometime over the next month and a half or whatever. Until then, go make some money. Have a great day. Bye-bye.